I work in a nursing home and my schedule consists of days, evenings, and nights. It's a rough transition between days and nights, but everyone that works there has the same shifts, so we just get through them together. The building has about 100 residents with 3 floors and is shaped like an L with a north and south wing and the nursing stations in the middle. The 3rd floor currently only has a few residents living there due to construction, with one of the wings completely shut down because they're ripping out the walls. Due to only a few residents being on that floor, only one nurse is required to be on duty on that floor. I've worked the night shift alone on that floor many times and never really experienced anything scary or weird. Sure, it's creepy and dark at night, but that was it. I've also never believed in the paranormal at all. I had the mindset that I had to see it to believe it. A few of my coworkers over the years had talked about how the 3rd floor was supposedly haunted and they would hear knocks at night and see weird things. I was always intrigued to hear about it, but would always just laugh it off. But one night a few weeks ago has really started to change my mind. I was sitting in the nursing station watching movies and playing on my phone. I had just done my rounds and had answered a call bell. I had felt off that night and constantly had the feeling of being watched. I also kept on thinking that I was seeing things out of the corner of my eye. The next part is hard to explain, but I'll try as best I can. As I was sitting there, suddenly a shadow dropped from the ceiling and hovered over me, but by the time I realized what I was seeing, it was gone. My heart jumped and I jumped out of my chair. There was no way that it would be a shadow from anything or a car passing by, as the only window looks out into the forest with nothing but trees for miles. After a few moments, I calmed down and left the nursing station to go check on my residents. Nothing seemed amiss, and none of them were awake, except for the little old lady at the end of the hallway watching her TV shows. As I walked back over to the nursing station, I was sure that I saw feet or a shadow moving under the crack of the door leading to the wing that was closed for construction. I opened the door just to make sure that it wasn't a wandering resident from another floor, which happens quite often, but there was no one there. I walked back to the nursing station freaked out, still feeling like somebody or something was watching me. I settled back into my chair and tried to watch TikTok videos to get my mind off of it. I was sitting with my back to the window facing the door. After about an hour of watching videos, I glanced at the clock. It was 3:03 a.m. I remember being slightly annoyed as my coworker had promised to come up at 2:50 so I could have my break and go out to my car to have a smoke. Suddenly, I heard 3 knocks on the window behind me. I jumped up and looked out of the window and saw nothing there. Flight mode took over and I just darted down the hallway, running into my coworker who was just coming up the elevator. Now, bear in mind I was on the 3rd floor, which is pretty high up. There was no stairway, tree, or ladder outside that window, so it was impossible for a person to be outside knocking on that window. I immediately asked my coworker if she knocked or heard any knocking, and she said no. She could see how shaken up I was and offered to switch floors for the remainder of the shift. I was very thankful, as being on the 2nd floor means you're with another nurse, so I wouldn't be alone. I went out to my car and had a few smokes just to try to calm down. I talked to the nurse on the 2nd floor, and she didn't seem too surprised. She's heard knocking up on the 3rd floor and had seen and heard weird things that she can't explain. A lot of people have died up there, and after that night, I honestly don't know what to believe anymore. I've never felt fear like I did that night, and I've since worked a few night shifts up there and didn't experience anything like that again. Could it be that I was just tired? I don't know, but I'll never forget how I felt that night. I was 19 at the time this took place. I was a Marine and I was on my first deployment to Afghanistan. Not too far from my platoon's patrol base was this structure that looked like a castle. Through interpreted conversations with locals, we were able to determine that they believed it was built by Alexander the Great. Whether this was true or not, I will never know, but this place did look ancient. So being Marines, we did the only thing that we thought was prudent at the time. We went out on patrol with the intent of setting up an observation post inside this structure. We took our Afghan border police with us. When we got close to the structure and our Afghans figured out what we were up to, they refused to go any further. Before they left, they kept repeating the same word over and over. I don't remember what the word was in their language, as this was a decade ago and there's no way I can remember that. But what I do know is that they were trying to warn us of evil spirits. We went in anyways, without our Afghans, with the intent of staying there overnight. This place was basically an ancient fort with mud or clay brick walls on 4 sides, with a building in the middle. So we set security, made sure we had comm checks with our patrol base, and that they had an updated position report on us so they knew where we were in case we got into trouble. Darkness fell, and not long after, I went up to take my turn on the wall with my friend. Our job was to watch for anyone that might be trying to sneak up on us or any other Taliban-related shenanigans. Not 20 minutes into our shift was when weird stuff started going down. The entire time there on the wall, I felt like I was being watched from all sides. I turned to see a figure walking along the wall not too far from where we were sitting. I say walking, but it was a robed figure that looked to almost be floating. I turned to my friend to see if he too saw what I did, and he was getting his night vision back on, which was turned off as it was his turn to rest, and when he looked, the figure was gone. We didn't see anything else after that for the rest of our shift. We uneasily finished and went to rest, where I ended up dozing off at some point. I don't know what happened next, but I awoke to a completely black figure literally squatting on my chest. When I went to yell for help, nothing came out, and it was like I had a hand over my mouth. I reached for my knife since I was a machine gunner and I couldn't just grab my machine gun, and I felt like something was pinning my arm to the ground. I tried to squirm free and couldn't move, so I bit down as hard as I could on what felt like a hand in my mouth. At this point, whatever weight was on me instantly disappeared and I could move and talk again. By that point, I was freaking out, and my brothers who were around me saw me. My training had kicked in, and I was trying my best to keep quiet and not pass out because I was hyperventilating. My squad mates calmed me down, and after telling them what happened, they all admitted to having the creeps. They also admitted to the feeling of being watched the entire time we were there. None of us could sleep, and we all basically sat back to back for the rest of the night when we weren't on watch. We were pretty freaked out, and so every noise and rustle in the wind made it even worse in the total silence of that ancient fort in the ancient desert. If you haven't experienced the silence of an open desert in a part of the world where there's absolutely zero light and noise pollution, then I suppose it can be hard to understand this. But any noise in a place like that in the middle of the night, in total darkness when you're already alert to sounds of the enemy, is just about the scariest thing anyone can ever experience. I will never experience that kind of fear in my life again, ever. As soon as the sun came up, we left. Everyone was scared, and none of us spoke about it again to each other, as many other patrol that night also had strange unimaginable encounters happen to them. We never went back to that area again, and didn't make it a permanent observation post for obvious reasons. I still suffer from nightmares and sleep paralysis because of my personal experience that night. The scariest part of this whole thing is that I know it was probably just in my head what happened while I was sleeping, but it felt very real. I worked the late night shift for a while as an EMT on an ambulance that does both 911 calls and generic transport in Southern California. For this call one night, my partner and I, both females, took a lady back home from the ER. She lived in a kind of sketchy neighborhood, and after dropping her off, we drove down a block away from the known Hooker and Pimp Street so that we could finish our paperwork and clean equipment away from that street. We were parked opposing traffic on a curb in the ghetto suburbs at 1 a.m. I had just finished cleaning, and I was standing at the passenger side with the door open. My partner was seated in the passenger seat, still finishing her report. All of a sudden, we heard a girl's voice from a few doors behind us screaming, "No, no, let me go," while a guy yelled, "You can't take her." My partner and I looked at each other, then down the road, because we heard someone's engine revving like an angry lawnmower. All I saw was headlights coming my way, and I took a flying leap into the cab across my partner's lap as she slammed the door shut behind me. Just in the nick of time, too, because the car came within literally inches of our rig. I'd have been crushed if I didn't have the reflexes to jump in. As the car went by, we saw that a bald, tatted-up Hispanic guy was the driver, and he was just casually flicking a cigarette out the window. In the back seat was a girl in her underwear desperately pounding on the window. Meanwhile, on the outside of the car was a dude in his tighty-whities. He had one hand holding onto the roof rack or something, and his feet braced up against the door while he was also punching the window. Not a scene that you see every day. I flicked on the lights and sirens, hoping to scare the driver, and my partner got on the radio telling dispatch a brief rundown and to send cops to our location as we were GPS tracked. The driver was not fazed in the least by our display. He stopped at the four-way stop sign, which was a bit surprising, looked at us in his mirror, flicked a cigarette, and took off. Naturally, we, two unarmed females, gave chase. The driver was cruising, weaving this way and that, trying to shake the guy hanging on in his underpants. We saw the dude fall off and run after the car, and a moment later the girl came flying out of the car in a very ungraceful tuck and roll. The two took off on foot behind one of those giant power breakers you sometimes see on city streets, while the driver floored it around a corner. We followed around the corner ourselves to try to get a plate number, but alas, he was sporting on advertisements on the plates that a newly purchased car would have. Since he was gone, we presumed that it was safe to get out and do our job and take care of those injured. We hopped out with the aid bag, and my partner kept watch while I ran to the giant power thing, but the nearly naked duo was gone. At that moment, 5 squad cars pulled up, and we gave them the story. They asked where the 2 were who escaped the car, and we responded that we didn't know. They asked for a description and possible direction, so we told them that if they went left and made another left 3 streets down where they first parked, they might find them. Maybe 5 minutes later, one of the cops radioed in saying that he found them. Here's the thing though, they denied everything. No car, no kidnapping, no chase. They said none of it happened. Of course, they couldn't explain why they were nearly a block away from their place wearing only underwear. They also couldn't explain their lack of shoes or the large amount of road rash all over them. Since technically they didn't do anything wrong, they had no desire to press charges or be treated by us, and they were let go. That was the night I learned some not only scary but just flat out weird stuff can happen late at night. I work a graveyard shift as a security guard for a recycling yard. When I was new to this job, only my 2nd week of working there, I was given a good scare one night. Basically, every hour I make rounds across a giant recycling yard covered in various precious metals that are broken down and sold. During my shift, I scan various checkpoints and ensure nobody besides me is in the yard or facility. One of my other tasks is to go through some grassy and bushy terrain and over a set of train tracks to take a photo of a warehouse far across. This is to ensure that it is safe and clear. I use a flashlight with 2000 lumens so I can see my way through pretty much the entire yard. Well, that one night during my 2nd week, just an hour in on my first round, I went through the grass and over the train tracks. I took the picture of the warehouse and submitted it. Suddenly, I got this intense feeling that I was being watched. The hairs on my neck stood up and I froze. My flashlight was still on and pointed at the warehouse. I slowly turned around and pointed my flashlight behind me. About 10 yards away, I saw a skinny, old, wrinkled white man with a large white beard sitting on a chair. He was looking directly at me. He had dirty jean overalls and I think a Western-style cowboy fedora hat on. Under the overalls, the only thing I could see was his bare skin, no other clothes. Now, I'm a 6 foot 220 pound man, but he scared the crap out of me when I turned and saw him. I screamed at a pitch that was probably embarrassing, and I accidentally dropped my flashlight out of shock. Mind you, there were thin, tiny metal shards literally everywhere on the ground where I was standing. I couldn't see anything now as the flashlight was facing away from my sight and not towards the man in the chair. All I heard was a quick pace of shuffling and the clanging of metal from footsteps quickly running towards me. Once the metal-crunching footsteps were within maybe 5 feet of me, I heard them quickly veer to the left and past me. Within 3 or 4 seconds, the metal clanging was gone, followed by the faraway sound of rustling bushes. I finally, carefully to avoid cutting myself on shards, grabbed my flashlight from the ground and pointed it towards the sound. The old man was gone, past the bushes to who knows where. I was shaking from adrenaline and fear. I managed to catch my breath and called several emergency contacts. When they arrived, the old man was long gone. I believe that maybe he was just there to watch the active trains move across. I say this because the metal chair was facing the tracks. It's still there and I took a photo of it, kind of as a memento to remember the time an old man scared the living daylights out of me. I've not seen the old man since, but maybe he still comes and sits on the chair, but is more careful about it. This happened about 5 years ago. I work at an upscale hotel in one of my state's most affluent suburbs. Like most hotels, we were struggling during the COVID virus. Our rates had been slashed in half to get guests through our door, and our clientele had shifted from upper-class business people to a mixed bag of characters. It was mostly fine, with a couple of notable exceptions, like this one night I worked. I was working overnight alone, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. About 3 hours into my shift, I got a call from room 235. He had a strange voice. It was quite raspy, and he maybe even had an accent. He told me that he couldn't figure out how to work the remote to his TV. I assumed maybe the batteries had died, but he insisted that the remote worked fine, and he just didn't understand how to operate the volume button. I found this strange. I've worked in hotels for 5 years, and have never once encountered someone who didn't understand the TV remote. I gave him the benefit of the doubt though. Also, working in customer service, you come to realize that people are much, much dumber than you would want to believe they are. Since I was alone at the hotel and not technically supposed to leave the front desk, I told him that if he came down to the lobby, I would gladly show him how it works. This upset him. He grunted and started complaining that our customer service was terrible, and what kind of a hotel wouldn't have an attendant come to the room for something like this? I gave in, as he was only one floor up, and it couldn't possibly take that long to show somebody how to change the volume on a remote. Everyone was checked in for the night already, and it wasn't worth the argument over the bad review later. I told him I would be up in just a moment. I knocked on his door and did the customary call out, "Guest services." I could faintly hear him talking to someone, but it was muttered, and I couldn't pick up any distinguishable words. At first, I felt like he was instructing someone else to get the door, and I anticipated it to open shortly after. The talking went on for so long, though, that I wondered if maybe the people in the room hadn't heard me. I was debating knocking again when the deadbolt slowly unlatched. Normally, when I go to a room, the guest opens the door wide and stands to the side to let me in, or at the very least opens the door enough that I can fully see them and they can fully see me. Not this guy, though. He barely cracked the door, opened it maybe only an inch. Even weirder, all the room lights were off. It was entirely dark except for the very faint glow of his TV, which was on, but the volume was turned all the way down. His voice sounded exactly like it had on the phone, raspy and whispered. He was standing behind the door, so I couldn't see him at all. Completely disembodied, he instructed me and said, "Come inside, sweetie." I said nothing and didn't move. I was a small 5-foot-tall woman with a baby face in my mid-20s. The man repeated, "Come on, come inside." He sounded more edgy and more insistent this time. It felt so obviously like a trap that if I wasn't absurdly on edge, I would have been insulted. How naive did he think I was? I pushed the door open, but remained as much in the hallway as possible. I also took the opportunity to reach for the light switch just inside the door. The lights came on, and I finally got a look at him. He was at least 60, white-haired and slim, and he was shirtless. He was wearing pants, but the belt was undone, and the ends were flopping down. I'm not entirely sure because I tried not to look, but I believe his pants were also unzipped. He appeared to be completely alone in the room, with the only piece of luggage being a small black duffel bag. I tried to explain the volume switch from where I was standing awkwardly in the doorway, but he wasn't comprehending it, or at least he was acting like he wasn't. I asked him to give me the remote so that I could show him, but he backed further into the room and said, "You know, it'll be easier for both of us if you just come inside." I was not going to step any further into that room, so I gave him one last description of where the volume button was on the remote and promptly closed the door. I felt like I was potentially going to be in harm's way while I was standing in the doorway and he was actively being a creep, so I left. I got downstairs to my lockable office with my security cameras, which would have allowed me to see him coming. I was just anxious and on high alert. I had decided that if he called again, I obviously wasn't going up, and if he came to the desk, I would have 911 punched into my cell phone just in case. The hotel is 2 minutes from the police station, and there's usually a patrol car hanging out in our shopping center. They show up quickly any time I have to call. The man did end up calling me again that night about 2 hours later around midnight. He wanted me to come up to his room again. This time, I told him if he wanted help to bring himself and the remote to the front desk, and I was not going back up there again. Thankfully, he never came down to the desk, and he didn't bother me for the rest of the night. About 25 years ago, I used to work at a gas station. It was one that was somewhat off a country road and only like 5 minutes from where I lived. I would work the overnight shift because the station was open 24 hours. This is something that was both creepy and easy typically. There wasn't a whole lot that had to be done overnight. The store part of the gas station was pretty small. It had a good amount of snacks and drinks, so I would do some stocking of the shelves and organizing here and there. Most of the time, though, I would just sit behind the counter. We had this TV that was hanging from the ceiling in the corner that I used to watch at a really low volume. Without that, I would have been truly bored out of my mind most nights. But the TV was amazing, because this was before smartphones, so I couldn't just go online or whatever. During the day, a lot of people would drive on the road that the gas station was on, and they would stop. At night, though, it was kind of the opposite. We would seldom get any customers. An occasional car would drive by and sometimes stop in for fuel, but normally if they did, they wouldn't come inside of the store. In fact, the gas station stopped being open 24/7 sometime in the late 2000s, and about 5 years ago it was converted into a smoke and vape shop. But back to the story. To be honest, when people did stop there at night, I always hoped that they wouldn't come inside, because being by myself in the middle of the night Whenever anybody came in, it always seemed kind of sketchy. There were a few strange people, but overall not that many scary experiences. One really stands out though. It was a night like any other. The time was roughly 2 o'clock in the morning, so this was among the quietest times of night for me. I was just sitting behind the counter and looking around the empty shop. To my right was the door to go inside, as well as 2 very large windows looking out to the gas pumps. Surrounding the station all around was pretty much wildlife. There was a dense woods right across the street, and next to the property was some tall grass and quite a bit of trees scattered around as well. We hadn't had any customers in the gas station in well over an hour. I don't think that I had seen a car in a long time either. I remember glancing out of the windows though and noticing what appeared to be a man. He was walking slowly from the sort of wooded field area next to the gas station and making his way towards the gas pumps. It was really strange to see because there was no real place that he would be coming from. After making his way to the pavement, he just kind of started standing around for a while. It was very strange. I kept watching him because I was very curious as to where he had come from and what he was doing. The man was bald, looked to be maybe in his 40s or so, and had a slight beard on his chin, I remember. He was also wearing sunglasses. After standing around and looking the other way mostly for like 2 or 3 minutes, he started to walk towards the gas station. I thought at that point that he was going to go inside. He walked all the way towards the doors. Then the man stopped, took out a cigarette, and started smoking it. He did not go inside the store. After smoking for a couple minutes, he then started walking away and crossed the quiet street. Then the guy literally walked right into the woods, which had me really puzzled. It was very strange because there was no path to go into the woods or anything. It was just like dense forest all around. That alone was one of the strangest things I had ever seen. But it got weirder. So maybe 30 minutes later, we still hadn't had any more customers. Out of nowhere, I saw movement outside and I looked up. I was just on time to see the same man emerging from the woods. After that, he walked across the street and back onto our property. This time though, he walked all the way to the front door and actually went inside. When he was in the shop, he started walking for the counter. I said hi to him, and the man said that he needed $1,500. I had a bad feeling when he said that, but hoped that I was misunderstanding him. I asked what he meant. The man then demanded that I give him $1,500. His voice was now angry. I looked at him, and he wasn't holding any kind of a weapon or anything, but he was leaning in fairly close. I didn't know if he had one on him, but I always kept a bottle of pepper spray just behind the counter in case. When the man demanded it again, he leaned towards me even closer and shouted. That's when I took the pepper spray, pointed it right at his face, and let it rip. The man was instantly blinded by it and moved backwards. He grabbed his eyes, and I yelled at him to get out of the store and that I was calling the police. The man backed away and thankfully left. When he got outside, he walked around covering his face, then crossed the street again and went back into the woods. It was very weird. I kept an eye out for the rest of my shift, but I didn't see the guy again. In fact, I never saw him for the rest of the time that I worked there. It was one of the weirdest situations I've ever had. Several years ago, I worked a temporary job as a part-time security guard. It was a job that I was not really qualified for, but I guess there wasn't really any requirements. There was this building in the sort of downtown area of the city that I lived in. The building was a mix of some offices and some other businesses. It went up several stories and connected to other buildings as well. During the day, the building was open and there would be somebody who worked at the main desk. Many people would walk through the building during the day, but at night it was closed, and for some reason they still needed a security guard. I would literally just sit in the desk all night and do nothing. Nobody ever came to the building, and I never had to talk to anyone. I wore a security guard uniform that was similar to a cop's outfit, but I was certainly no cop, not even close. The only training I got really was to call the cops if anything happened. But on the other hand, I could just sit down and go on my phone for hours and get paid for it. I could play games and watch YouTube videos and do whatever I wanted really. I would also walk around the lobby area and some of the connecting hallways to get my steps in. I didn't mind the job much because it was just part-time, so it didn't really get old. Anyways, one night I was working, and by this point it was probably after midnight. I know that I was at my desk like usual when somebody knocked on the door. This was something that had never happened before. There were 2 glass doors that were at the main entrance. Obviously they were locked now. I wasn't really sure why somebody would be knocking on the doors, but I felt like it was my job to go and check. They also tried to open the doors as I got up, so I walked over to see who was there. When I arrived, I saw a relatively young woman standing there outside. It was a fairly cold night and a little rainy as well. By this time, really nobody else was out walking on the sidewalks or streets. When I got to the door, she was motioning for me to open it. I knew that I was to never let anybody in the building after close, so I tried to tell her through the glass that we were closed and she could not come in. She didn't seem to get it though, and motioned that she could not hear me and for me to open the door again. So reluctantly, I did. I opened the door just a small amount, and I told the woman that the building was closed. She said something like she was very cold and needed to use the restroom quick. I told her that the building was off limits, and I gave her directions to a building nearby that was actually open. She did not seem satisfied, but accepted what I said and started to walk away. Then I closed the door and went back over to my desk. That was the first time that anybody had ever come to the door while I was working. In fact, it was the first time that I had ever interacted with anybody at the job. However, not more than 20 minutes later, I heard a knocking at the door again. This was really weird, but then I figured that it was probably the same woman there again for some reason. I walked over and saw that there was now a man standing right outside the door. He had a hooded sweater on, but that didn't seem very suspicious because the weather would call for that. The man knocked again and waved me over. I walked over to him, and then without really giving it a second thought, I opened the door a crack. I was going to tell him the same thing that I told the woman. However, literally the second that I opened the door, the man barged his way in, pushing the door into me. Then he pushed me over, knocking me to the ground. Before the door swung back and closed, another man forced his way inside and stepped over me as I was on the ground now. I did not have any weapons, and I wasn't getting paid enough to stand there and fight the guys. So I got up and quickly ran out the door and left the building. The men were now both inside to do who knows what. I ran a safe distance away and I called the police. I walked around the sidewalks, freezing cold, hoping that the men didn't come after me or anything. Soon though, the police got there and I flagged them down. 3 cars with a total of 5 officers arrived on scene, and some stayed and talked with me while others entered the building. And thankfully they were able to apprehend the 2 men who were still inside the building. They also tracked down that same woman who I had talked to earlier. Apparently she was the getaway driver for the men and was in on it, which made sense. After that I went back to work, but quit a short time after. That was a little too much action for me. I'm still mad at myself for opening the door and letting the guys in. I had just talked to the woman and that had gone fine though, so I wasn't really thinking. I guess maybe their original plan was to try to get her in the building. When that didn't work, they decided to go in by force. For a short time period, I used to work as a customer service representative during nights. It was a job that I did from home. I would work my normal job during the day and then work the night shift at home taking calls. I had a guest room in my apartment that I worked out of, and it was normally pretty easy. I used my guest room as an office, and from like 8 o'clock at night until midnight, I sat at my desk with my headset and my computer. I was able to take calls, help customers for the business that I worked for, and stay at home. I was working a lot at the time to save up money, and I only did 2 jobs at once for several months. For this job though, I wouldn't be getting calls all the time. I'd get maybe like 10 a night, so there was a lot of downtime where I could just relax mostly, and I got paid the whole time, which was good. So, nearing the end of my shift one night, it was shortly after 11 p.m. This was not necessarily a quieter time, but it was just later. I found that there was about the same amount of calls regardless of the time, but on this night I hadn't happened to get a call in a little while. So then I got a phone call and answered, except this was not the normal customer. When I said hello, at first nobody said anything on the other end of the phone. When I said hello again, this time I heard a man's voice start to speak. He did not sound normal though. It was like he was trying to disguise his voice or something. What he said next really creeped me out. The man told me that he was outside my apartment. I said, "Come again?" The man then said that he was right outside and claimed that he could see me. I asked if this was a prank, and he started laughing this creepy laugh. I didn't recognize the voice as anybody that I would know. I asked again why he called. The guy said that he just wanted to let me know that he was right outside my place and that I should go look. I didn't believe him at all. I said, "No, you're not." Then I hung up on him because I was not willing to play games with some prank caller. But then, moments later, there was a knock on my apartment door. Instantly, I was extremely nervous. I had truly thought that it was just a prank call, but now it didn't seem like it. I stayed where I was in my office. Then there was another knock on the door. I decided to get up and go and see who was there. I walked over to my front door. But by the time I got there, I looked out of the peephole and whoever had been there was gone. Then I got another call. When I answered it, it was the same person right away. He gave me another creepy laugh and asked why I didn't answer the door. I asked who it was in a nervous voice, and then he hung up on me. I was so creeped out, fearing that I was being stalked or something, and I called the police. I told them what happened, and they said they would send an officer to my location. As I was waiting for them to arrive, I got another phone call. When I answered it, it was the same person, but just laughter. It was really creepy. Then they hung up again. When the police officer arrived at my apartment, I told him what happened, and he looked all around the building. Unfortunately, he never located who did it. After that, for the rest of my time working that job, nothing else like that happened. I still don't know who did that to me or why. For a year, a long time ago, I worked at a convenience store. It was off this road with a lot of other businesses on it. My store was like the ones connected to gas stations, except we didn't have any gas. It was just a small store with lots of drinks, snacks, and a little bit of other stuff. So basically, I would work by myself during the night at the counter. We closed at 3 a.m. every night, so it would be pretty late nights for me. Usually, not that many people would come through for my shift though, so I preferred it to working a normal shift, because though the hours might have been odd, it was significantly less work. From the time that I started, there would usually be a decent amount of customers, but then as the shift went on, it would get quieter and quieter. After midnight, we would hardly get anyone. So one night, at around midnight, I remember that nobody had been in the store for a while until this one guy walked in. When I saw him entering, the first thing that I noticed was that he was wearing a clown mask. It was kind of creepy to see at midnight, but I also just figured that it was some guy trying to be funny. It was not Halloween time, so I wasn't very amused. Of course, working by myself behind the counter, when somebody enters wearing any kind of a mask, it raises suspicions. I thought that it could potentially be a robbery. The man walked in though, got within maybe 20 feet of me, and then turned and started looking at me. As he did, he was just standing there. I said to the guy, "Very funny, pal." He didn't respond and just kept standing there and staring at me. I said, "What do you want, a prize? Best costume of the day, there you go." The man still ignored me. After like another minute of us just staring at each other, the guy finally started walking away. He moved towards the other side of the store very slowly, still looking at me. It was very strange. At last, the man walked to the doors and finally left. I was glad to see him go. For the remainder of my shift, which was about 2 or 3 hours, I didn't see the guy. There was maybe 2 or 3 total people for the rest of the time that night. I remember when I was finally off at 3 a.m., I locked up the shop and went to leave. When I was walking out, I saw the clown man a ways away. He was across the street by the corner now, walking down the sidewalk by himself. He was the only person out that I could see at that time. I thought it was weird that I was seeing him again. As I walked away to go to my car behind the shop, I remember noticing him start to look over at me. I quickly walked away though and got to my car and went home. The next night, I worked again. It was the same exact hours as I usually did, so I would be getting off at 3 a.m. Nothing really strange happened during my shift that night. There was a guy who came into the shop and looked around for kind of a long time and then left without buying anything. But other than that, things were pretty quiet. Well, that night, after I got off of work at 3 a.m., I closed up the shop, left, and went to my car again. When I got there, something really weird happened. When I opened my door, on the driver's seat, there was a clown mask, the same one that the guy had been wearing. I was so surprised to see it that I jumped back, and I thought that the guy might be in my car. I looked inside though, and he wasn't there. I took the mask and tossed it, and then I went home. The next day, I was paranoid. Everyone that came in the shop, I wondered if it was the clown guy. I didn't see him again though, and I really have no idea how he got inside my car. I thought that I locked it. I guess it's possible that I didn't, or maybe he picked the lock or something. My car was kinda old, but I really don't know for sure, and it's all very strange. When I was younger, for a while, I used to work at a grocery store. I was 19 at the time and was just working there for the summer. It was a small town grocery store in the city that I lived in, and my mom was friends with the owner. That's basically how I got the job. The only bad part was that I had to work the night shift. So right before the store would close, I would come in. There would be a list of tasks for me to do, and basically when I got them all done, I could leave and go home. Except the store closed at 9 p.m. and there was always a lot to do, and it would take me until past midnight most of the time. Sometimes I would be working until like 2 a.m. or later, and when I worked, I would be the only one in the entire store. It was a little weird to be by myself in the grocery store, and most of the lights would be out by that time as well. There were just a few dim ones, really just enough so that I could see. Overall, it was not a bad job though, because sometimes I would be able to get off a little bit early. Some of the tasks that I usually did were cleaning, always stocking a lot of shelves, and some other random stuff. I would change prices, put up and take down signs and advertisements, and get the place ready for whoever was opening the next day. The grocery store was pretty small, but it still had just about everything that you would want. One night after I came in, I started going through the tasks. It started out as a pretty typical night. After doing a little bit of cleaning, I was stocking shelves near the canned goods. Out of nowhere, I heard a sound. It was the sound of footsteps. Somebody else was walking inside the store. This made no sense. I had been working already for about 2 hours, so we had closed a long time ago. Nobody else was supposed to be there, and nothing like that had ever happened before. I stopped what I was doing and listened. The footsteps were definitely a few aisles away, and they were walking down at about an average pace. Then the footsteps started to get closer. However, they ended up stopping, seemingly not that far away from me. Maybe in the next aisle over or the one after that. After not hearing the sound for a couple of minutes, I walked over to the next aisle over and looked in it. There was nobody there. I looked in the next aisle after that, and there was nobody there either. As I was walking back to where I was stocking shelves though, I heard the footsteps again. They sounded like they were behind me, but a ways back and out of my sight. I turned around and looked, but didn't see anybody. Then I spoke, asking if anybody was there. No one answered me. By that point, I was really creeped out by the whole situation. Nothing like that had ever happened before. I decided to look all around the store to see if anybody was there. So I made my way slowly closer to where I had last heard the footsteps. The store was mostly dark, except for the dim lights that were kept on overnight. Like I said, it was pretty much just enough for me to see. I looked through a few aisles without noticing anything. Then I got to one aisle and looked down it. There was a man standing in it. As soon as I saw him, he looked over at me. Then he turned and started walking away out of the aisle. I shouted at him that we were closed and he had to leave now. He didn't say anything back. I walked after him in his direction. However, I had lost him and had no clue where he was anymore because he had quickly gone out of my sight. I heard him walking for a while, but then I stopped hearing him. At that point, I was just walking up and down all the aisles in the store. I was really nervous, wondering why the man was there and what he wanted. I should have called the police right away, but I was practically a kid still, and I guess I panicked. So after walking up and down the aisles for a little while, I suddenly heard the footsteps behind me. I looked back and saw the guy approaching me like 20 feet away. It was one of the scariest things I've ever seen. At that point, I just took off running. I made my way to the door and just bolted out of there. I ran to my car and drove home to my parents' house, which was pretty close by. Then I called the police. After coming to my senses and the police were there, I went back to the grocery store. My boss got called as well. The police found the man hiding in the back room. Apparently, he had been in the store before close and then just stayed in and hid someplace. Why, I don't know. I'm really glad that I got out of there when I did, though. I don't work nights anymore, but for years I worked the night shift in a residential care facility. On weekends, I was the only person in charge of a dementia facility. It was sometimes spooky, consisting of 15 residents and only me to keep an eye on them all throughout the night. Around 3 a.m. in the morning, after doing an intentional round where I checked on all the residents and they were safe and well, I heard the doorbell ring. I got a sudden wave of goosebumps because this was a secure facility and it was the middle of the night. I went and looked out of the window, but there was nobody there. I blew it off as being a hallucination because I was exhausted most of the nights. About 10 minutes later, the doorbell rang again, so I went back to the window and checked again. Nobody was there, but I looked across the street and a strange car was parked there. I took a photo of it just in case, and then I went back to my station where I had been playing a game of cards with a delightful but very demented lady. I sat down and she looked at me and said, "What did the gentleman want, dearie?" Chills went down my spine, but I brushed it off because hallucinations are common with dementia, and this lady is particularly prone to not being oriented to time and place. However, the doorbell rang again less than 5 minutes later, and this time I was getting scared. Another one of my residents was awake and walking in the hallway, painting with a clean paintbrush to keep him occupied. I passed him on the way to the front window, and he turned to me and said, "Don't answer the door alone, he might hurt you," before continuing to pretend to paint. I looked out of the window to see the same car as before, and as I was looking around, I saw a shadow moving in front of the door. A person walked around the corner and then looked straight into the window next to me. We made direct eye contact, and it was essentially a jump scare for me, so I was startled and screamed. My residents started freaking out, and the guy on the other side of the door ran away. I called the police, and they showed up shortly after. It was straight chaos at that point, because I had 15 residents who all had been woken by the commotion, and 2 police officers in the building now also. Eventually, with the help of the 2 kind officers, I was able to get everybody settled down, but it took a while. I eventually learned from the cops that there was a woman down the road whose house was broken into. She was attacked in bed by someone who ransacked her house looking for drugs. I can't help but wonder if it was the same person from earlier that night, intentionally trying to get into my facility for the drugs that are kept there. I'm grateful that our whole facility was so secure, and apparently the culprit just took the next best option. A strange part of the story that I'll never understand is how 2 of my patients knew that there was a man out there who wanted to enter and potentially hurt me. They were never close enough to the door to look out of the window and see anyone. It feels like one of those eerie guardian angel moments, or just a strange coincidence. I left that job not long after because they refused to hire a second person to work the nights, despite being understaffed according to best practice guidelines. I worked at a water treatment plant on the graveyard shift. The place was isolated, situated next to a highway that connected 2 cities about an hour apart. Nothing but some empty fields and trees were in between. It would just be me there during the night shift. My job, and why I had to be there, was to check the levels, adjust equipment every now and then, and basically just make sure that everything was working and it wasn't going to blow up. During my shift, I would be inside an 8-foot-tall barbed wire fence which was locked, but the access door to the rest of the facility were always open. One night at about 2:30 or 3 a.m., I was sitting in my control room area killing time on my Nintendo DS. The sound of the game was the only thing breaking the silence, and I was halfway zoning out when I heard a voice from behind me. The voice shouted out to get on the ground. I turned around and saw a guy standing there behind me holding a gun. He must have climbed the barbed wire fence to get to me, because I could see he was bleeding from several locations on his body. I must have been taking a while to comprehend what was happening, because the man yelled to get on the ground again. I didn't hesitate this time, and I dropped to my knees. He kept the gun pointed at me as he stepped closer. I remember that he kept apologizing to me, saying that he was sorry, but he had to do this. I thought that maybe he had been hired to kill me by someone, and what could I have possibly done to deserve this? He began asking for my truck keys, my wallet, and my phone. I didn't argue, and I handed everything over. Next, he tied me up. He used some duct tape that was near my desk, wrapping it around my wrists and my ankles. I still had no idea if I was going to die soon, or maybe I was being kidnapped and that's why he was tying me up. After a few minutes, the guy backed away. He apologized again, and then he turned and walked out of the room. I heard the sound of my truck starting up, and then the tires crunching the gravel as he drove away. For a moment, I just sat there, totally in shock, trying to calm myself down. The duct tape wrapped around my wrists and ankles wasn't the greatest, and I was able to free myself after a while. I used the emergency phone at the water treatment facility and called the police, and they said they would send someone right away. When the cops came, they asked me a bunch of questions, wrote down everything I could remember, and arranged for a way home for me. The next day, I found out the guy was arrested in the town over. He'd apparently escaped from an inmate custody transport a few days before, and had been on the run ever since. The police said he was desperate, probably running out of options, and that he had likely walked a long way to get to the water plant. That made sense, considering how far in the middle of nowhere the plant was. I even got all my stuff back besides the cash in my wallet, because he had been caught trying to pawn off my stuff in the next town over. I think about that night often, and have had to go to some therapy for it. The man was obviously desperate, and maybe he had thought about killing me, since it would likely have given him more time to escape, as the cops would have been called much later. There have been some other strange occurrences that happened while I was working the night shift job, but this one was easily the scariest thing that I ever experienced there. Many years ago, I used to work a night shift at a hotel in South Carolina. During the summer season, it wasn't so bad, mostly families. We had on-site security during the summer also. However, the winter months were different. The cheap weekly rates we'd offer attracted a lot of creepy people. The idea was to make money in the off-season by renting to what is known as snowbirds, older retired people who come to the beach for a month or so through the winter. It did not always work out that way though. The cheap rates made it possible for less than desirable people to become long-term residents. I've discovered more than my fair share of meth labs, broken up physical assaults, and more during the winter months. Working the night shift, I would meet some interesting people. I have a lot of stories from the night shift, but this one is the one that stands out because it did not end well for me. I began working at midnight and hung out with my friend Andrew. Andrew worked late-night maintenance shifts at this hotel and 2 other hotels that our company owned. He would regularly stop by after work and go grab us some food, and we'd hang out and talk since business was so slow. We had just ordered food, and he was getting ready to leave and go pick it up. I was just walking into the office to grab some money from my wallet to give it to Andrew when I heard the doorbell indicating a customer had entered. I had just come back and reached the doorway back to the lobby area when I saw Andrew just fall down in front of me. Next thing I knew, a guy walked around the corner and punched me in the head with a short steel pipe in his hand. It staggered me and I went on one knee. He hit me in the head with the pipe, and the only thing I remember was his partner saying that Andrew got away and found a cop, so they had to go now. I was finally able to get to my feet from the blow I received. I tried to call the police from the phone in the back office, but it was having issues. I slammed it in frustration. I was hurt, scared, and really freaking out. I realized they could come back, so I ran to lock the door. I don't know where Andrew had gone, and that worried me. I finally got the phone to work, and I told the 911 operator that I had been attacked and I needed an officer and an ambulance. I didn't unlock the front door until the cops and ambulance pulled up. It was at this time, after I found out they punched and knocked him down, that Andrew had been able to amazingly jump over the desk and escape. He luckily ran outside as a cop was driving by, which he ran to flag down for help. I ended up in the hospital ER where I had to have 10 staples in my head, and they gave me morphine for pain. I thought I had only been hit in the head once after being punched, but I was later shown the video from the hotel cameras, and the video showed a different story. After I went to one knee, the guy hit me not just one time, but 10 total times. I kept trying to grab the pipe and get up for some reason. I do not remember any of this happening. He kept punching me and hitting me with the pipe until his accomplice told me that Andrew got away and flagged down a cop. We never found out why they chose to attack me. The police thought it might be a failed robbery attempt due to Andrew getting away and me not just going down. The only other explanation I could think of was someone was getting revenge on me for one of the many incidents I had to deal with while working the night shift. For example, maybe someone was getting back at me for a physical assault that I broke up in a room, or the meth labs I had discovered. Once I recovered, I came back to work the night shift for a bit, but I had PTSD and was very nervous it might happen again, so I ended up finding a different job. They never caught the guys who did it as far as I know. I used to work night shifts at this large manufacturing facility. The night shift consisted of a very small crew, including 5 security workers and 5 of us doing administration and packing. As administration staff, I sat with security as they'd switch between patrolling and monitoring the cameras. It was usually silent and boring. One night near Halloween, I was halfway into my shift on my lunch hour break. It was chilly, and I went to my car to grab my bigger jacket and have a smoke break. I was right outside the back door where this fence is closest to the building. It's maybe 10 yards off the back door. The only light was motion activated, and I had to keep making grand arm movements to keep it on. It's all grass and shadows up to the fence, and the light doesn't really hit that far. I was watching videos on my phone, and the light went out from a lack of motion. I sat in the dark a bit, sipping my coffee and finishing my cigarette. As I was finishing, I reached up and waved to activate the light to find the ashtray, but as the light flickered on, I heard a noise on the fence across from me. We do get some animals out there, and they could get startled, but as I stood up, I heard the fence keep slightly jiggling. When I looked up, I didn't see much. The light didn't really illuminate much outside its circle on the ground. My first thought was to say hello, which I did in a questioning tone. When I spoke, the sound stopped for a moment. I squinted into the darkness trying to adjust, but it was hard with the light on. However, once the light turned off again, the light from the moon had a little bit more effect lighting up the area. The fence started jiggling again. As my eyes adjusted better, I saw movement. It looked like a person opposite me at the fence fidgeting with the links. I thought this must be a kid just trying to spook us. Maybe they were going to break in and explore, which some kids had done before without knowing the building never closed. But it wasn't common, and this was one person, alone. I was worried, so I radioed to desk security with my walkie-talkie. I informed security that we had a visitor outside the fence on the north end of the building. I've seen the monitors of camera feed, and I know this area is totally covered by cameras. They would be able to check the fence clearly. My walkie beeped back, and the security guy said, "We aren't reading any movement at the fence. Is it in the tree line?" I responded back no, and they were fiddling with the fence right in front of me. The next events all happened so fast. Security didn't even have the chance to reply to me when from the fence, I heard this massively louder thrash of the lynx, and all I saw was a figure full-on sprinting at me. I spilled my coffee all over as I rushed back inside the building. I pushed myself inside and held the knob in place, trying to keep the deadbolt in place. The knob was flicking down hard against my hold. I could hear and feel something moving against the opposite side of the door. By the time security got down to me, I had the deadbolt in place, and the knob of the door was still now. I didn't understand why the security workers weren't taking me seriously while I explained the story, until I saw the playback from the cameras. It was just me outside. There was nothing there. I immediately thought this was a big prank on me, but everyone else genuinely thought that I was the one fooling them. Upon watching the footage a second time more closely, however, we noticed the way the door handle kept moving even when I removed my hand from it. Both the inside camera and outside caught it. We also noticed right before I panicked and turned to run inside, the fence made a slight jolt as if it was pushed. There were no holes in the fence or any kind of cuts made where somebody could squeeze through. There were no creepy shadows or unexplained wisps of smoke or light or movement besides those. Nobody there wanted to admit anything happened to me. Everyone came up with logical explanations like it was tricks of the moonlight, an overactive imagination, or too much coffee. I didn't want to argue about it. They already thought that I was being weird about it. I went about finishing my shift, but nobody used the back door again that night, and it remained locked. The longest employed security employee was finishing up his shift at the desk with me in the office that night. A few minutes before clocking out, he cleared his throat and told me, "I never really liked that north end. It feels like someone's eyes are always on me." It's honestly the most he's ever said to me in the years plus I worked there. The most I ever heard him say. I felt like the statement held even more weight from that alone. I worked there another 7 months and never had another incident. I never actually went out there again though. I stopped smoking, took my breaks out in the lobby, or wasted time chatting with coworkers. I made any excuse not to go out by that door again. I've never before or since had any moments where I felt like my imagination got the better of me, and I truly believe that wasn't the case here. I keep thinking back to that door handle jerking down when I was not touching it anymore. That had to be proof I wasn't imagining the whole thing. I worked overnight at a Subway inside a 24-hour truck stop, which wasn't the most glamorous job, but it kept the bills paid. Most of the time, it was quiet, especially after the regular truckers had eaten and left for the night. I was behind the counter one night, cleaning up some stuff, when this guy came in. He was just standing there staring at the menu, and then he asked me if I had a sandwich for him. At first, I thought he might have called in an order or something, so I asked him his name to look it up. That's when he stepped forward a bit, and I saw that he was covered in blood, soaked through his shirt, splattered his jeans, and dripping onto the floor. It was dark in the store, and I didn't realize how bad it was until I saw the red. It wasn't a little bit either. He was really covered in it. I froze for a second, and then he told me that I didn't need to know his name and to just make him a sandwich. I didn't want the guy to panic, so I tried to stay calm and think of the best way to notify someone. While making his sandwich, I thought of an excuse to go to the back of the store, saying that I needed to get more lettuce since the bin was almost done. I signaled to my other coworker who was relaxing in the back before her shift started, to go get the off-duty state trooper who worked security around that time. A few minutes later, I saw the trooper finally coming into the store as I was finishing up with the man's sandwich. The trooper saw the trail of blood on the floor and the guy's stare, and it was obvious that something was seriously wrong. He must have had years of experience with things like this, because he moved in slow and steady, pretending he was just there for a sandwich, and got close. But the second he got close, the guy tensed up like he was about to bolt. The trooper stepped forward and grabbed him as the guy tried to pull away, but the trooper was faster. The man covered in blood was arrested and then questioned. The guy had been stabbed, but he didn't even know how bad it was because he was in shock. Apparently, he'd stabbed someone to death earlier that night, and the shock he had made him so disoriented he didn't even realize how badly he was bleeding. He'd been driving around, gassing up his car at the pump just a few feet away, and getting food to go on the run. He was just some guy who walked in wanting a sandwich, acting like it was no big deal while covered in blood after a murder. It was a chilling experience for me having to deal with something like that while working a night shift job. I worked at a dollar store for a while. This was years ago now. Sometimes shady characters would come in from time to time. I was never too worried though because nothing ever really happened. But one time I was working by myself one evening. The dollar store would be closing soon as it was approaching 10 p.m. I was the only one working and by myself. Typically this time of night was very quiet and we hadn't had any customers come in a while. I had checked out a customer maybe 10 minutes prior and nobody else had entered the store since. So I was all by myself up at the checkouts. I was just on my phone bored and waiting to get off of work. But it wasn't too bad, the fact that I could just sit there and play games on my phone and stuff. I was completely fine with nobody else being there. It was very quiet inside the store for a while, only the small sound of the low volume from the game that I was playing on my phone. Then, out of nowhere, I suddenly heard a sound. It was coming from somewhere in the store. It sounded like something had fallen off a shelf. The way that it broke the silence kind of spooked me, and I felt a little nervous. I looked in the direction but couldn't see anything. Our dollar store was about an average size for one, so the store wasn't that big. However, I could only see a few aisles, and there were many places that were out of my sight. After looking in the direction for a little while, I still couldn't see anything. I didn't hear anything else now either, so I stayed where I was. I chalked it up to maybe just an item that was placed too close to the edge of a shelf or something. I continued with my game, but I'm not going to lie, I was a little bit nervous now. Then it happened again. I heard another item fall off a shelf seemingly. This time I knew something was up. I looked over, but this was out of my sight as well, so I got up and decided to investigate. I was pretty nervous, but I made my way over towards where I had heard the noise. As I quietly walked, I didn't hear anything else at all. I got closer, and soon I saw what fell. There were two products in the same aisle that had fallen down. Nobody else appeared to be inside of the store. I looked at where the items had fallen from, and I had no idea how they could have fallen on their own. So I put them back, and then I started to walk around the store. As I was doing so, I heard another noise. Something fell from a shelf on the other end of the store way out of my sight. Now I was super creeped out. I called out, asking if anybody was in the store. There was no answer. I slowly walked over to where this next noise had come from. When I got to that aisle, I saw something else on the ground. I didn't see anybody though still. I looked around and then called out again, asking if anybody was there. Still nothing. Now I was in the far back corner of the store, and at that point I suddenly heard the sound of footsteps. It was not very loud, and I could only barely hear it, but it sounded like somebody running. They were making their way up towards the front of the store. I started walking over there. By the time I got within view of the front, I actually saw somebody. There was a man up at the check lanes, specifically the one that I had been at. I really couldn't believe it. I had no idea that anybody else had been in the store. The man was trying to get into the cash register at my check lane that I had been working at. Thankfully, I had locked the cash register because I hadn't used it in a while. It was a habit for me to not leave it unlocked. The man saw me come into his view. He continued trying to open it and then tried picking it up and then started banging on it. He looked over at me and I kept my distance but yelled at him to stop. The man didn't say anything. Then he jumped up and moved to another register. That one was also locked. They all were. I yelled that I was calling the police and then I got out my phone. The man messed around with that one for a while and then he got up and ran away. He left the store running off into the night. I quickly went over to the doors and then locked them. We were closing early now and I didn't care if anybody else showed up. Then I waited for the police. When they got there, I spoke with them, giving my account of what happened and so forth. They said that they would go look for the man. After that, though, I don't think he was ever located. He didn't come back to that store, though, I know that. He must have been really good at keeping quiet, because I had no clue that anybody had been inside the store. I'm not sure when the man got there or how he stayed out of my sight for so long. That was the scariest experience from working at the dollar store, though.